across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition. Always a great opportunity to hear from Penna and Kelly Shackelford. Going to talk about a victory that Liberty Institute has been able to win, as well as certainly talk about a few more candidates Rick Perry has announced, and we have many more that we can probably see on the horizon. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the comments made by one of those presidential candidates, Hillary Clinton, when she was in Houston talking about voting rights. And before we are too much further along, I'm sure we'll get into many of the other topics that deserve some attention. Immigration's in the news, and of course, an ongoing watch for the decision coming down from the Supreme Court on same-sex marriage. But Penna, always lots to cover.
We're waiting for that, and I think this week we may have had 3 people enter the presidential race. Lindsey Graham, did he officially enter, and also Rick Perry and Lincoln Chafee on the Democrat side. And I understand Jeb Bush will be actually officially entering about the middle of the month.
And again, June is a very busy month. This week we've talked about the fact that before the end of this month, June 30th, you, of course, will have decisions on everything from Obamacare to same-sex marriage. Before the end of the month, we're supposed to have some kind of treaty between the United States and Iran. Yesterday, we talked with Jay Richards that in about 2 weeks, the Pope is going to publish an encyclical on the issue of climate change. I remember, Penna, in the old days, June used to be a time when we oftentimes would run a repeat program and kind of lay back a little bit. But this is going to be a busy month, isn't it?
We'd go on vacation and others would, and I think we've got more happening this month than most any other month.
Kelly, let me come to you. We always like to talk about some of the things happening in the area of religious liberty. You have a victory, and it has to do with the HHS abortion pill mandate.
Yes, this is Joe Holland Chevrolet in West Virginia. Great example of many believers who are out there across the country who run their businesses and want to run their businesses, in a biblical manner, and that's very important to them. Everybody who's aware of Hobby Lobby, of course, and all that. Well, there were a lot of Christians across the country who, said, look, we're going to run our business in accordance with our faith. And so when this Obamacare mandate came that said you're going to buy abortifacients for your employees, there's many of them that said, I'm not going to do that. And Joe Holland Chevrolet was one of those that we represent. We represented a number of those. And we now have a permanent injunction.
Yes.
Meaning that they cannot ever interfere with Joe Holland Chevrolet. So I really appreciate people like Joe Holland. I mean, I appreciate people that are willing to stand up, because I think what we're going to find as the heat sort of is turned up more, maybe even in a few weeks, and I'm already hearing stories of this. People are going to really the sheep and the goat are going to be separate. They're going to be separated, and I hate that this is true, but I'm going to guess half of the churches, half of people who say they're Christians, who say they're going to be outspoken, aren't going to be willing to pay any cost for it, and so we're going to see them fold. And so this is an example of what a real Christian looks like. Somebody who actually is willing to suffer whatever consequences because they're going to follow Christ. I mean, a lot of people want to follow Christ until they know where he's going. He's going to the cross. And it's real convenient if you think he's going to, a hot fudge sundae. And so it's great to see people like this who do stand. And there's Christians listen to this show. There's Christians all over the country who are being faithful in their business. They're running it in the way that Christ wants them to run it, and they're willing to do the right thing even when people are trying to pressure them to do the wrong thing. And I think this is an example of that, and it's also a precedent that now makes it clear, if it wasn't clear already, it makes it even clearer, that every single person who's running their business, even a for-profit business, has a right to follow their faith and has a right not to be told that they have to pay for abortifacients for their employees. Many people have been fooled into thinking they're not. Their insurance people told them something, but if you're doing Obamacare, you are, whether you realize it or not, and you have the right not to do that. And so that's what this man in this business did, and I think it's a great example for the country.
Kelly, is his situation, Joe Holland Chevrolet, covered by the decision in the Hobby Lobby case?
Yes. So the Hobby Lobby case, set the precedent.
Yes.
But they still tried to finagle things even after that, but it's not working. At least not yet, and I don't think it ever will. We're getting precedent after precedent on this, and so if people are willing to stand, we win. It's just a matter of the people having the courage to stand by their faith and to do the right thing.
There's one thing I noticed in your story, in Liberty's story, about this, and that is at his website, they stated a purpose of the dealership to glorify and honor God by being faithful servants for all that is entrusted to us. Is that an important thing for businesses that want to follow their faith to do at this point, if they want to at least have a way to fight back if they're challenged?
No, that's a great point, Penna. It's one of the reasons why Hobby Lobby won their case. If you are running your business in a Christ-like way and those issues are very important to you, it needs to be in your legal documents. And don't think you have to go out and, spend $1 gazillion hiring teams of lawyers. It's been done. A lot of people have done it. We have on our website a place for churches and nonprofits, for instance, to go, but a lot of it's similar language that you can just take that other people have used that really fits your religious background, your theology. So whether you're Catholic or whether you're Baptist or whether you're Presbyterian or you name it, there's language that fits your particular approach to the major issues, and you can put those in your documents. And if you do, you're protected. You can rely upon those when these kinds of situations happen. That's what Hobby Lobby did. That's what Joe Holland Chevrolet did, and everybody can do that. And I think it's a great practice. We've had a lot of churches even say to us, I'm glad we did this, because what it's doing is it's forcing us to write down, the core of who we are, what we stand for, and it's been a very good thing for us. We call it religifying.
Right.
That a lot of people have in their documents nothing, real specific because they didn't want to attract any attention in their documents. And now they're realizing, what, if we don't do that, we can't rely upon any of this to protect us if we're in a situation like Hobby Lobby. And so now people are putting those things more specifically, because what you specifically say, you can now use as a defense if something happens in the future.
If you go to libertyinstitute.org/audit, and that's on our website there, and that will take you to the Liberty Institute webpage, you have a section there which is entitled, Audit Your Church and Religious Liberty Audits, and you've got a section there for churches, nonprofits, course. Right now we're talking about profit-making entities as well. You also have one under construction for schools. You've got religious liberty templates and guides. So this is the time now to take that action. That doesn't mean that you're going to be totally protected. Anybody can sue anybody else, but it means you will have a much better chance in the court, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the Supreme Court's dealt with this, and we've seen examples now with Hobby Lobby after the decision a few years ago where they said you need to be specific. That is what really saved Hobby Lobby, is they had laid out, here are our beliefs. This is why this is important to who we are as a company. They could then rely upon those things as a matter of religious freedom when they were under attack.
So again, last week we talked about that in terms of the issue of same-sex marriage. Today, talking about it in terms of abortifacients. But take some of that information and use it for your church, for your business, for your Christian organization. We'll be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
The Apostle Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 6:19 that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God. I think we can agree that we should take care of our bodies. And I found that most Christians do try to eat right and take care of their bodies in most ways. But I've also noticed that many do not get enough sleep. We all live busy lives, and sometimes sleep is seen, even in the Christian world, as a luxury rather than a necessity. A new study shows how sleep-deprived people make poor decisions. If we want to be all that God intended, we need our sleep. Researchers at Washington State University took a set of volunteers and had half sleep normally, and the other half actually go without sleep for 2 days. In one test, the volunteers had to click a button when they saw certain numbers and hold back when they saw others. Then they switched the rules. The well-rested group did better on the task, as you might expect. But when the rule was reversed, none of the sleep-deprived volunteers were able to get the answer right, even after 40 tries. Paul Whitney, a psychologist at the university, put it this way: it wasn't just that sleep-deprived people were slower to recover. Their ability to take in new information and adjust was completely devastated. Apparently, the lack of sleep dulls our nervous system to new information. The study also demonstrates why many of us think we can get by with less sleep. On some tasks, the differences between well-rested participants and sleep-deprived participants wasn't very much, but on others, the difference was remarkable. At the very least, the study suggests that you shouldn't be making high-stake decisions when you're sort of asleep. We know that sleep-deprived operators failed to prevent the Chernobyl nuclear power plant meltdown and the Exxon Valdez oil spill. This latest study reminds us that we need to take care of ourselves. Getting enough sleep is not optional, it's essential. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna and Kelly Shackelford. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I know our next topic is probably going to generate some phone calls, so I might as well open up the phones. And that is, we have been talking about various candidates, and candidate Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of the State, has said that when she was in Houston, of all things, because I think there's some irony there, and Kelly, you can pick up on that if you want, that there are at least 4 governors who might be running for the presidency. Texas Rick Perry, who announced yesterday, Wisconsin Scott Walker, Florida's Jeb Bush, who will announce, and New Jersey's Chris Christie, don't know, but she says that they should stop fear-mongering about a phantom epidemic of voter fraud. Then she goes on to make the case that Republicans are just using this to enact voter suppression. Now, Kelly, of all the people I would know to have here, you have actually sat on the platform committees for the Republican Party, both in Texas and nationally. Was the goal when you had that plank in the platform for voter ID, voter suppression, or did you have something else in mind?
Yeah, it's really silly. I mean, this is one of those just obviously, it's embarrassing. What happens is before the elections, the major general elections, it reminds me of that ad in Missouri. Yes. The racial ads where they try to tell people, African Americans, that they're going to take away their right to vote and they're going to do this. It's all sort of, the hypocrisy of saying this is fear mongering when that's exactly what she's doing is incredible. But let's talk about Houston, where she was.
The location I thought was striking.
Catherine Engelbrecht and their group there just decided to have a bunch of retired people, moms, go and just be poll watchers, which is, an old tradition in this country. You just go and you're there. You're not there even as a representing the government. You're just there to watch and make sure everything is okay. Well, the stuff they saw was unbelievable. They saw all kinds of violations. And so for her to come into Houston and say, well, it's just this, they're coming up with this phantom problem. And I know, at the Heritage Foundation, I think it's either he or Hans von Spakovsky, or it is John Fund. But they've written a book, and they list a number of the actual fraud that was going on. Those are the ones that were caught, of course. So number one, it is something that's important that we not do. And why wouldn't you want to make sure that people are voting are really, citizens and registered? Now, what the King Street Patriots, what Catherine Engelbrecht and them uncovered down there was that a group had come in from out of state. They had all license plates from out of state. They were funded by George Soros, and that they were registering people to vote in Houston. And when they checked the voting rolls of who they turned in, a huge number of them were invalid, weren't real people. And so, and then guess what happened when they got into court? They said, no, there's been a decision here a few years ago, and the attorneys for the city of Houston settled with the Democratic Party by saying that they would not expunge anyone off of the voting list, even if they were invalid.
Wow. And
so this is what happened. So it's just ridiculous. And all these laws are talking about is that you show some sort of ID. It can be a free ID that you get. It can be your card where you go to the library. It could be anything, but you show that you actually are not an illegal alien or someone else trying to vote that doesn't have the right to vote.
It's fair to everyone to have a clean voting roll. And what Hillary is trying to do, and they're always trying to make it very easy to get registered to vote. And what she's advocating now is that you would have automatic registration of kids when they turn 18. And, that's just another one of their methods for trying to get more liberal voters, more Democrats. And, under Bill Clinton, didn't we enact the motor voter laws that made it very easy and less validation to register to vote? And then just the same day voter registration policies in certain states where you can actually register the same day that you vote. Like, there's really time then to validate. And Hans von Spassky from Heritage also said of Hillary's idea that that would be a recipe for double names on the voter rolls, because you'd have people registering and then they would also be automatically registered. So another way to just make the voter rolls unreliable.
Is it possible that somebody could go in and be fraudulently someone else, and like maybe James O'Keefe's individual that went in and said, I'm Eric Holder, when Eric Holder was the Attorney General? Now, you got this 20-something white kid, and he's about ready to be given a ballot for a man who is 60-something African-American Attorney General of the United States. So
yep.
I think you can see how easy voter fraud could be. And back to the point, John Fund has written actually 2 books, one and then a revision of that one. And we're not just talking about a few allegations. We're talking about some people who are doing hard time for voter fraud that takes place. And I think that's the first issue. And then of all things, to say this in Houston, where you have the King Street Patriots and you had the True the Vote that developed from all of that, it was really a bit interesting that Hillary Clinton talked about it there in Houston.
Yeah, and again, this is something that's been to the Supreme Court. It's been upheld. There's nothing wrong with trying to make sure that people who vote are really eligible to vote. It's kind of basic, but I keep waiting for for Hillary Clinton to speak out against people having to show ID at the airport and all this other stuff.
That was my next one. I mean, just think of all the things you have to have a photo ID for to live in this country, right?
Yeah. This is disenfranchising, everybody else from flying or from
cashing a check
or going to the library
or whatever.
It's so ridiculous. It's just so. It's amazing that people can say this kind of thing in public and not immediately be sort of drummed out because people go, "Well, that's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard." You've lost all credibility with me. But this is, evidently this works on some people and. Again, it's fear-mongering. She talked about not fear-mongering. That's what it is. It's like they're trying to take away your right to vote. No, you could go vote. They just need to make sure and know who you are. And most people drive to the polls, to vote. So they probably got a driver's license. And all these laws, by the way, make it very easy where even if you didn't have a driver's license, didn't have any other ID, you can get an ID for free. And they can know who you are. So it's not a matter of money or anything else. It's just this is just something they use to gin up the vote when they move towards elections.
And again, in the state of Texas, we talked about Houston, but you remember Texas, Lyndon Johnson, of course, gave us the Voting Rights Act. But Lyndon Johnson, so-called landslide Lyndon, in 1948, actually won because this one particular county, everybody voted in perfect alphabetical order. And if you believe that, then I do have some swampland.
They didn't even try,
I didn't even try to fake, and of course that was one of those times in which you've got voter fraud. And so we're not just talking Cook County and Illinois. We're not just talking about West Texas. There are all sorts of examples all over this country, even in the last election, where voter fraud obviously was taking place. And one of the questions I want to put to our listeners, do you think it is an unreasonable requirement to have a photo ID for somebody to vote? Because I see voting as a privilege, and of course Hillary Clinton's making it a right because she wants everybody at the age of 18 to be automatically registered. Penna, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just have to say it again, and that is, if you are a person who's registered to vote and you vote, and there's someone that's voting that is not eligible to vote, they're voting the opposite of you, they're canceling out your vote.
Yes.
So if you look at it that way, it's the duty of government officials and authorities to keep the voter rolls in pristine condition so that people's vote counts. And, those who want to open it up and make it easier to deceive are doing the exact opposite.
Again, sometimes when we don't have close elections, it's not a big deal, but we've had some close elections. John Kennedy and Richard Nixon, of course, the most recent one with George W. Bush and Al Gore. But, I've always used this example over the years about the importance of one vote, because Penny Pullen has been on this program with us before. When she was running for re-election in the state of Illinois, they actually had a tie vote. It was the closest vote in the history of Illinois, and they had never any idea of what to do with that. So they flipped a coin, and she lost on a coin flip. Here's the rest of the story. She went to her church that Sunday, and more than 30 people said, "Oh, Penny, if I'd known it was so important, I would have voted. I got home late, or I was out of town, and I didn't think about getting an absentee ballot." We have some really close elections in American history. And as Penna points out, if your vote could be invalidated by somebody who shouldn't be voting in the first place, that should cause you some concern. What are your thoughts? 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But also we have some candidates who have announced. We'll get some analysis around the round table of what we think about some of them and some of the issues that they need to be addressing. All that coming up right after this.
Monday, June 29th. That is likely the day the U.S. Supreme Court will release its ruling on whether the Constitution allegedly supports same-sex marriage. How much have you prayed asking God to intervene? The oral arguments made it clear if the court rules in favor of overturning thousands of years of history, it puts a set of crosshairs on every Christian school and ministry, every church, and every Christian, because if the Constitution allegedly supports it, every biblical Christian is forced to be an outlaw. Again, I ask, how much have you prayed? Now, I realize you can pray without joining our Pray for America campaign, but have you? Honestly now, have you prayed? We can all use reminders. Let us give you one from time to time. Take a minute or so right now and sign up at pointofview.net/pray. We'll send you a free Pray for America booklet and a wrist reminder pointing you to spend time in prayer for the nation. Pointofview.net/pray. Pointofview.net/pray. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter with us today. Let me take a phone call, but we're going to get into some other issues. And if you have any comments about this idea of a voter ID, certainly that's fair game. We're going to talk about Rick Perry announcing, as well as what need to be some of the key issues that you need to look at in evaluating these candidates and their campaigns. But let's go first to California, KYCC. Elizabeth, thank you for calling today.
Hi, I just have a comment. I think that yes, we should be asked for ID in order to vote. If you want to vote, you should have identification for this privilege you are getting.
And that's the kind of the point I'm making. I think what you are hearing right now from candidate Hillary Clinton, which is different from some of the Republican candidates, is I think former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is saying it's a right. And I'm thinking, well, it is a right in the sense everybody has the right to vote, but I think it still is a privilege. And that's a very different kind of mindset. A privilege requires, it's a privilege to get on an airplane. And in order to do so, you have to show a voter ID. If you want to cash a check, they want to see a voter ID. If you want to, as we said, take out a book from the library, voter ID. Back in the days when we had video stores, there is no way you could ever get a video without showing a photo ID. And we can go on and on and on. You really can't, in many cases, even get into an emergency room without a photo ID. So in some respects, we're asking people to get in line with the 21st century, aren't we, Kelly?
Yes, and obviously the reason why her idea is such a horrible idea, the idea that you automatically register everyone to vote, is it's just wide open for voter fraud, because what happens then is you simply watch and see who doesn't show up, and then you become them, which, you know, is a mass. It's over half the population. I mean, you talk about throwing the elections, it wouldn't take very much. You just take a small percentage of that and who aren't voting, and then, you know, and this is the same message to the church, by the way. If just a small percentage of the church would go vote that aren't voting, they could swing the whole election. I mean, everything's very close, and yet most people aren't registered, and most people who are registered don't vote. And so it's like 75% of the country is asleep. And so it is something that's very important, because if you automatically register everybody, now you've really got some danger. And again, all you would have to do is look at you can't find out who people vote for, but everyone can find out who voted.
Yes.
It's available to the public. Everybody will know. And so if you watch and all these registered people are not voting in any election, then all of a sudden you assume their identities, and voter fraud, it could be rampant.
I would say so.
You know, one other reason, I think a big reason not to have this policy of automatically registering people is that, you know, in the early days of our country, you had to be a citizen to vote, and everybody wasn't automatically a citizen. There's certain requirements, and they made it easier. But if you don't even have to make that step of registering to vote, to show your interest, that you're interested enough in the country that you would take the step of registering to vote, but they're going to just give that to you without you doing anything to get it. I don't think people deserve to have that. And just the knowledge that you need to register, that you know our laws well enough to know that you need to register to vote. I mean, I just think you need something basic that shows that you are a concerned citizen that's qualified to think about these matters.
Yeah.
I mean, to make it so smooth and easy, it's almost like you're the parent trying to pave life for your child. The nanny state doing that, even in terms of voting.
It is awfully complicated, though, that voter registration. There's all those tricky questions, like name, address, zip code. So that, I don't know, that might not be fair to tell people that they actually have to provide their name, address, and zip code.
Or that they could maybe read
well
enough to fill it out.
And there used to be a time in which originally it was used, I think, in an effective way, and then it was used against African Americans, where you would require some level of knowledge before you'd be allowed to vote. And in the old days, I think that made some sense. You didn't want somebody just showing up that just got off the boat from another country and did not even understand that we have 3 branches of government or anything like that. But of course, it then ended up being used to disenfranchise African Americans and others from voting. I still think it was a good idea, but it's been so harmed in the past, it's never going to happen again, because when you look at these surveys, so many, even kids graduating from high school, don't have a clue about the electoral process, cannot tell you what the 3 branches of government are, cannot name any of the rights in the First Amendment, do not know who the vice president is, and on and on and on. Mm-hmm. Find the number of people that know who their 2 senators are, and you're really stretching. And by the time you get to whether or not they know who their state representative is, you're in single digits of percentages, aren't you?
Absolutely.
You've looked at that before.
Yeah, no, it is an issue. And so one of the things, there's sort of a self-selection, over in, I guess it was Iraq, wasn't it, where they voted and they put they had the purple on their finger, and I think the turnout, if I'm not mistaken, was a huge percentage because they actually cared.
Yes.
They wanted to vote, and so if people don't care, I don't know that I want them to vote, because they're not going to be educated. They're not going to have any way to know who they're choosing between. They're going to go, well, Green looks like a better name than Schwartz. And then those are the people deciding your election. So I think obviously people should have to at least say, I'm interested in voting. I'll at least fill out my name, address, and zip code, and and drop it in the mail with no stamp or at the registration. I mean, that's so easy, and you can do it. Anybody can be registered. They can go to their library. They can go to their post office. They can go. I mean, those little cards are available for anybody. So it's the smallest of things to do. But you know what? We need to know that people who are voting actually live somewhere in particular. They live in that district. And I mean, that's at least a little bit of control over knowing that these are real people, real citizens who live in real places in the United States, and they're registered to vote and they're eligible to vote.
Wow. Let's take another phone call. We'll go to South Carolina on the Good News Network. Will, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Well, I'm listening with great interest. I'm thinking that Ms. Clinton has been looking at the polls and the public statements, and she's trying to use this to deflect the searchlight and trying not to answer some of the pointed questions that are coming at her. And on another side, I can just see her giving her checkbook and credit cards, and hey, here it is. You don't have to prove that you're me, so go at it. She just doesn't make any sense.
Any comments?
It's pretty rich that Mrs. Clinton is basically saying that these particular candidates or future candidates and their governors are making up a problem. That's rich.
Well, and it is interesting to see the way this press has covered it, because I've got all sorts of front page articles here, and the big story about Marco Rubio right now, they have too many traffic tickets. When you put that up against the amount of money that's gone through the Clinton Foundation and all the questions we've raised here before, but the big story today was the traffic tickets that Marco Rubio and his wife have.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and by the way, Marco had 3. What's amazing also, though, about the Hillary Clinton is that, and I saw a reporter who was there and he reported that the media was told that there would be no media availability after her speech yesterday, that her speech would be the media availability. So, I mean, she's going out and giving a speech about something, and she refuses to even answer questions about it. This is what's incredible. I mean, I can never remember a candidate running for president who has shielded the press away like this. I mean, it ought to be that the American people would begin to say, well, we are not going to consider anyone who thinks they're the queen or the king before they even win. I mean, they won't talk to the press. She just gave a speech on something she wants to make a point about, but she refuses to take any questions.
Where's Sam Donaldson when we need him? Remember what he used to do? He'd shout out questions to Ronald Reagan when he was president.
It's the most stiff and orchestrated campaign I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, we will see how it plays out. We'll take another phone call after the break, but then want to talk about Rick Perry. He announced yesterday, and I loved one of his lines. I've seen American life from the red dirt of West Texas cotton fields, from the campus in College Station, from the elevated view of a C-130 cockpit, from the governor's office of the Texas Capitol. Now I'd like to see it from the Oval Office, so we'll get some comments around the table from some of you who know him, and also talk about some of the issues candidates should address. So if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, we've posted a couple of articles that you would certainly like to follow, and of course a link to Liberty Institute. So go to the website pointofview.net and do so. If you'd like to join us on air, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back, and finish off a few comments on voter ID, talk about Rick Perry, and get into campaign 2016. All that coming up right after this.
Lawyer for the U.S. government had to answer a question he probably would have preferred not to tackle during oral arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court in Obergefell versus Hodges, the marriage case. Justice Samuel Alito asked the Obama administration's Solicitor General, Donald Verrilli, a question about how the religious liberty of religious schools that oppose same-sex marriage might be affected if the court rules that same-sex marriage is a civil right. Justice Alito brought up a case that came before the court in 1983, Bob Jones University versus United States. Here's the exchange. Justice Alito asked, in the Bob Jones case, the court held that a college was not entitled to tax-exempt status if it opposed interracial marriage or interracial dating. So would the same apply to a university or a college if it opposed same-sex marriage? Mr. Verrilli, the Solicitor General, replied, I don't think I can answer that question without knowing more specifics, but it's certainly going to be an issue. I don't deny that, Justice Alito. It is going to be an issue. For an organization's tax-exempt status to be revoked means it would no longer be exempt from federal income tax and is not eligible to receive tax-deductible contributions. Many, probably most schools would not survive that. General Verrilli's answer was, yes, religious schools that oppose same-sex marriage in their policies and teachings will have their tax-exempt status challenged and be likely to lose it if same-sex marriage becomes the law of the land. What about other organizations that hold to Orthodox Christian beliefs, like churches? Will churches be subject to loss of tax-exempt status if every state is forced to perform or even recognize same-sex marriages? Another justice, Justice Scalia, asked, and I'm quoting him from the oral arguments, he asked, is it conceivable that a minister who is authorized by the state to conduct marriage can decline to marry two men if this court holds that they have a constitutional right to marry? Then he said, I don't see how. Kelly Shackelford of Liberty Institute says, if we get a bad ruling later this month, religious liberty will come under severe attack. It's begun with wedding vendors. Other faith-based businesses will have hiring practices and rights to operate according to their religious beliefs challenged. Christian colleges and schools' accreditation will come under fire. Governments will attempt to force faith-based adoption and foster care providers to place children with homosexual couples. Licensing for many professions will depend upon acceptance of the gay agenda. And employees at every level of government and in the military, as well as federal contractors, will be penalized or punished if they do not toe the line that the right to same-sex marriage trumps religious liberty. When it comes to religious liberty, one of America's first founding principles, we're at a tipping point. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Weekend Edition. Let's go back to the phones in California, KLMB. Kathy, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, I had to have my license to vote, but also when I had gone into Job Corps in order to go on Treasure Island, I had to actually obtain my original birth certificate. Mm-hmm. And a lot of federal jobs you have to have an actual birth certificate, not your driver's license. So I'm not quite understanding what the Democrats are having a problem with.
Well, just don't go on a military base. Don't live in the modern world, and then I guess you could survive without a photo ID.
Obviously, all these people are being disenfranchised, and they're being discriminated against. People don't want them to get those jobs with the federal government. That's why they're asking for ID. I mean, again, this is the argument that the person who wants to be president of the United States is making. I mean, it's complete nonsense, and anybody who lives in America knows that. But yet the press just treats it like it's just a fine argument, and it doesn't matter even that they can't do any Q&A after the speech.
You know, we're taking the calls, of course, on this issue, and Point of View listeners are going to be with us. I think they're going to say that voter ID should be required. But really, if you go take a poll of the country, because it's such common sense, that's the answer you get across the nation. You get a high percentage of Americans who think that a voter ID should be required.
Well, some want to talk about that, but also some want to talk about this idea of automatic voter registration. So let's go to Arnace in Georgia, WAGP. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I just posted an article on my Facebook about the item that Hillary is advocating. Yes, we are eligible to register to vote at different ages in different states. However, you have to pass a test to get a driver's license, and there needs to be at least a minimum knowledge of government before you're even allowed to vote. And this is part of the reason for the schools should teach civics, conscientiously teach it in the earlier years rather than the later years. My daughter-in-law teaches civics and government in seniors, but many children don't go to be a senior. They need to be this a little bit earlier. And on the other, and I'm very distressed with Christians, evangelical Christians particularly, who don't vote. You know, I feel like I want to slap them one time.
I want to get Kelly's comments on 2 points. You know, there are some states now that are saying that to graduate from high school, you have to get at least a passing grade, and I think it's like 60 out of 100. So they've really lowered it on the citizenship test. In other words, we require people who come here from other countries to pass the citizenship test. They're saying now that to graduate from high school, you should, they've lowered the standards rather dramatically, be able to get at least some questions right on the citizenship test. And maybe that's something, because again, I know you've looked at this before in terms of requirements in the state of Texas and other places for what we teach in terms of citizenship and civics.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I think that's obvious that, and I think, you know, Arnice made a really good point, which is you don't do this like when they're a senior, because there's going to be people that drop out. I mean, there's a decent percentage. So it's something that you should teach early on and that every American should know. I do think that the idea of having a test before you can vote, like you said, it's not going to work because of what's happened in the past. So,
sadly,
yeah, I don't think you can do it. I mean, we do it for people to become citizens. We do it for people to become driver's license. We do it for all kinds of things. I just don't think because of the past you could do that with registering to vote. But let's at least have people that are willing to fill out their name and address, zip code, and so we know where they live, we know what district they're in, we know if they live in a real home, and not like the King Street Patriots found, you know, instead, oh my gosh, there's 10 people living, you know, at this office building. You know, I mean, you could find out if people actually have to put things down and put down where they live. You can, it's at least a way to make sure that people are eligible to vote. They're really here. They're really citizens, and then we don't have as much of the voter fraud.
I remember some of the others say they looked up one address and it was a vacant lot, and they looked up another address and it was a Burger King, and it was pretty obvious. And of course, you had the ones, what was it, that in Nevada, where they had the starting lineup of the Dallas Cowboys and had some others, Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, ones that you would obviously know are not true. But let's at least take one more call on this issue of voter ID and mandatory voter registration. And I thought I'd talk to a military person and a retired military individual, Bill in Arizona. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. I'm Bill, and I'm a retired vet, and my wife and I are registered voters. I don't mind people coming in from across the water and everything else, etc. However, let's count the votes before we have to dig up the bodies. Okay? And you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Going into a long draw.
Well, a lot of dead people. You know, we had Louis Gohmert on here one time. He said, you know, one of the things the Republican Party really needs to work on is that as they need to find dead people to vote for them, because the dead people always vote for Democrats.
Well, the thing about it is, you know, dead people cannot talk.
Yeah. Well, and again, Lyndon Johnson had a number of people that voted for him in 1948. Of course, we've had some of those ever since then. But I would love to get your comments. You have been, and thank you for your service, you have been able to join the military to fight for our freedoms. I would think you, more than perhaps anyone else, would be upset about the fact that the freedoms that you fought for now are being eroded away. Any comments about that?
Well, you don't have 3 hours for me to work my...
Figured that's what you're going to say. Yeah. But again, you know, Kelly, we talk about the military and how we, whether it's military chaplains or whether it's these memorials or just all sorts of things, we haven't treated our military well, but I appreciate those who've served in the military, and I think they, above all anyone else, have to say, you know, we went out there and fought. Some of our colleagues died for these freedoms, and then now for people to protest because we asked them to do what? Show a photo ID before they vote? It just seems really striking.
Yeah, you know, you reminded me of something that we have not mentioned yet, and I want to make sure and mention, and that is D-Day.
Yep.
I mean, we're on that anniversary, and I don't know if it's linked to point of view yet, but I'm sure we can get it linked. But at libertyinstitute.org, I think the second thing underneath that is remembering D-Day, and I wrote some stuff that I think people need to read. Some history, a reminder. I think it's something, I mean, I took my wife and kids to Normandy, and we went to all those places, the cliffs and everything else, and it really was educational to them. I think very few Americans learn about what really happened then and the incredible courage and I mean, that we'd all be speaking German or, you know, saying Heil Hitler if that had gone a different way. And it was, but what they did was just, it took unbelievable bravery and courage and against all odds and against all situations. And I think we need to remember that when we come to a weekend like this.
I think another thing people don't know is that the Freedom from Religion Foundation has said that the headstones at Normandy do a poor job of representing the diversity of today's military. So they don't like what's represented at Normandy.
And it's really, if you've never been there, if you've never been to the American cemetery there, it's something everybody should do. It's very powerful, and the pictures alone are powerful, which many people see. But I would encourage people. Go get a copy of that. Okay, it's linked to pointofview.net.
Yeah, remember their D-Day faith this Saturday.
And I would share this with a lot of people. Yes. Put it on your Facebook everywhere. People need to remember. I bet most people don't even realize that anniversary is here, right. and certainly not all of what that means.
When we come back, we'll talk about Rick Perry's announcement yesterday in which he spent some time talking about the 9,000 graves and the 45 pairs of brothers and others. And so we'll talk a little bit more about D-Day. We'll talk about his candidacy, and we still have lots to cover. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to find some of those links and some of the things we've already talked about, go to our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
If you are like me, and like most people, I guess, I bet you have a bunch of ways to remind yourself of things. We have alarm clocks to help us get up on time, reminders on our calendars, in our computers and tablets and smartphones, reminders about meetings, reminders to pick up the kids, to pray for the country, to make sure you don't miss your anniversary or special birthdays. Wait a minute. Do you get reminders to pray for America? Or maybe you don't think the country needs God's intervention. No, I know that's not it. We set up reminders for so many things, but be honest, do you ever find that time for prayer gets crowded out by all of those other very important things? I know you're busy, and that's why I want you to do one simple thing. Visit pointofview.net/pray. Sign up. We'll send you a free booklet titled Pray for America. You'll get occasional updates on important issues to pray for, a little wrist reminder, all designed to urge you into the Father's presence to pray His mercy on America. Pointofview.net/pray. pointofview.net/pray. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, weekend edition. Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter, and we'll spend just a minute here talking about Rick Perry and his announcement. Then we'll take some more phone calls. So those of you on the line, and I see quite a number of you, we'll get to you in just a minute. But yesterday, just down the road, as a matter of fact, some of our staff were up when he was making that announcement in front of a C-130, and with a couple of Navy SEALs surrounding him and the widow of American sniper Chris Kyle. He made his announcement. I quoted some of that, but he also, interesting enough, Kelly, talked about Omaha Beach. Let me say it real quickly. On that peaceful, windswept setting, there lie 9,000 graves, including 45 pairs of brothers, 33 of whom are buried side by side, a father and a son, 2 sons of a president. They all traded their future for ours in a final act of loving sacrifice. In that American cemetery, it is no accident each headstone faces west. West over the Atlantic towards the nation they defended, the nation they loved, the nation they would never come home to. As you mentioned just a minute ago, we've made it possible for people to find out a little bit more and maybe share with their friends and family members about what D-Day actually means. And I thought it was interesting that Governor Rick Perry spent some time talking about D-Day as well.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate thing for him to do. I know that one of the things that he's highlighting is there aren't a lot of people in the race who served in the military that are veterans, and that's something that he has that others don't. So it's smart to highlight that. Yeah, I would encourage people to read that article on pointofview.net that's linked from our website, and to share it with other people, because it not only talks about D-Day and what happened, but it also talks about reminding people how we weren't afraid at that time to pray, to call upon, help from God, and how that was America. That's as a part of America as anything. And so we have to be really strong to stand against this attempt to eradicate that. I mean, that's part of the reason why, we had all these people die, is to defend that America, which would be gone otherwise. So I would encourage people to read that. I mean, there's probably going to be some facts that they didn't know about, and that they can share with others.
What do we know about Rick Perry? Penna, let me come to you, because, again, this is an individual that has been a governor for longer than any other individual in the state of Texas, and they've done pretty well in job creation, haven't they?
Well, that's right. And I think, it's where the rubber meets the road. I was at an event where Kelly introduced Rick Perry, and that was the real point, was to say that Texas has created jobs in a time when this country's been losing jobs. And I know you have the statistics on that. Now, some people have come back and said, well, you had the fracking boom, but I have some statistics on that, because oil and gas is only 13% of the Texas economy, and only 2.5% of our employment in the state of Texas. So, yes, that was a success story here, but it's the policies, it's the light regulatory touch that Texas has. No state income tax, no corporate income tax. And he's also traveled widely to woo companies to come into the state, and we've had many come in. And so this is a very successful governor. He's also been a social conservative. He presided over the fact that we had a marriage amendment here. We have a lot of pro-life laws that have passed. So, just look at a record and you see somebody that knows how to lead in a conservative state, and all of that. I think the idea that he kind of blew it last time. I was really sort of in the last election excited about Rick Perry because I thought he could win so easily. And then he just sort of blew it. And I worry a little bit that is going to stay with him and going to be very hard to overcome. Now, there have been others who have said, hey, you had hard times, and just because of the hard times, it's going to make him a stronger candidate now. I just don't know. I don't know. He has sat beside me in this studio. We've interviewed him. I remember he wrote a book on the Boy Scouts. He's an Eagle Scout himself. And he... I think we're all familiar with him. Kelly knows him better than any of us. But I think the other part of his campaign that's very different from some of the top-tier candidates he comes from a very, very humble background. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, went to college, went to Texas A&M, was in the military, in the Air Force, and then was a governor. So he's an American success story in that sense, and that's appealing. When you have a Hillary, you've got a Jeb Bush, you've got others that kind of started out with privilege. So, I mean, there's just a lot of good things about Rick Perry.
Kelly, add to it.
I think his main, every candidate you can look at and say, what is their main strength? What is their weakness or whatever? For Governor Perry, he's got the record that nobody else has. Scott Walker's got, the record on fighting the unions. But Rick Perry has the record on the economy. And if you look at what happened in Texas, it was fairly amazing. I forget the years. I used to know this by heart, but it was like he was governor for, 12 years? And I don't know, the last 8 years of his reign, I think, while the United States was adding a total of 1.1 million jobs, and Barack Obama was going around bragging about 1.1 million jobs. The reality was, if you excluded Texas, the country had lost 400,000 jobs.
Yes.
Texas had gained 1.5 million in that time. And I think if you look at the whole time he was governor, I think a third of the jobs in the U.S. came from Texas. So, yes. And as Penna said, it wasn't just because of oil and gas booms and those things. It was really because of the policies put in place. And I'm not going to say the governor did all that, but he was a part of a state that had, a Senate and a House that he agreed with that was conservative, meaning it was, let's allow freedom, let's allow competition, let's have regulations for health and safety, but not beyond that for all kinds of liberal ideas and craziness that bottles up businesses and keeps them from growing and adding people. And let's do things like curbing, frivolous lawsuits. And there are a whole number of things they did to make it to where businesses could flourish and be given the freedom to try and to fail. And it works. And it worked in Texas. So I think the governor has all the instincts. All of his instincts are conservative instincts. Growing up in a small Paint Creek, I don't know how many people, less than 100 people or whatever it was. He's got all those instincts. His downside is he ran last time. He had a back injury. He was on drugs, and he didn't perform well. And his oops moment in the debate sticks with him. And to be honest, debate is not his greatest thing. That's not his gift. And so he's going to have to go through those debates again. And even though will be well now, it's not his strong suit.
Right.
I think he'd be a good executive, but in order to be the good executive, you've got to do well in the debates. And so I think that'll be a challenge for him, as well as sort of getting by the image that he's already created for himself.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some phone calls after the break. But also, one of these articles that came out in the Washington Post says that Governor Perry is accepting Senator Marco Rubio's premise that this will be a foreign policy election. If so, we've talked this week with Ian Brimmer and others about that. Of course, also, what about this marriage issue? So we're going to get into some of the issues that candidates need to be addressing and you need to evaluate. All that coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
The Apostle Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 6:19 that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God. I think we can agree that we should take care of our bodies. And I found that most Christians do try to eat right and take care of their bodies in most ways. But I've also noticed that many do not get enough sleep. We all live busy lives, and sometimes sleep is seen, even in the Christian world, as a luxury rather than a necessity. A new study shows how sleep-deprived people make poor decisions. If we want to be all that God intended, we need our sleep. Researchers at Washington State University took a set of volunteers and had half sleep normally, the other half actually go without sleep for 2 days. In one test, the volunteers had to click a button when they saw certain numbers and hold back when they saw others. Then they switched the rules. The well-rested group did better on the task, as you might expect. But when the rule was reversed, none of the sleep-deprived volunteers were able to get the answer right, even after 40 tries. Paul Whitney, a psychologist at the university, put it this way: it wasn't just that sleep-deprived people were slower to recover. Their ability to take in new information and adjust was completely devastated. Apparently, the lack of sleep dulls our nervous system to new information. The study also demonstrates why many of us think we can get by with less sleep. On some tasks, the differences between well-rested participants and sleep-deprived participants wasn't very much, but on others, the difference was remarkable. At the very least, the study suggests that you shouldn't be making high-stake decisions when you're short of sleep. We know that sleep-deprived operators failed to prevent the Chernobyl nuclear power plant meltdown and the Exxon Valdez oil spill. This latest study reminds us that we need to take care of ourselves. Getting enough sleep is not optional, it's essential. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go back to the phones and take some phone calls. In Georgia, Amy, what would you like to ask today?
I'm a very slow learner.
Sure.
And have trouble understanding. And I need to know how to figure out who to vote for. And
join the club. It's kind of hard right now.
I want to do my civic duty, but I don't know how to do it.
Well, that's a very good question. And there are millions of people that are thinking that, Amy. And I'll go to Kelly because I know he's going to give you a good answer, because people want to know, where can I go to get good information about the candidates? Tell us about that.
That's the great thing, is that there are groups who that's what they focus on. And for instance, I bet most of the Point of View listeners think favorably of Focus on the Family. It's a wonderful ministry. Well, there are groups somewhat connected to Focus on the Family, not officially, but Focus kind of puts their stamp of approval in every state, because they want there to be a group in every state that is focusing on the family, on public policy that's good for families. And these groups are called family policy councils. They're in pretty much every state in the country. I think you can go to Focus on the Family and look under family policies or state groups or whatever. Almost every one of those states have voters' guides. And the voters' guides don't tell you who to vote for. They just ask questions and gather the information on a number of key issues so that any Christian can look at those and see the issues that they really care about and see where the candidates differ. And so the voters' guides are a great way to get that information. Now, even if you're really active and you listen to Point of View and you're really following things on the presidential race and you know what you believe about the presidential race, but almost nobody knows about their state representative in the House race, their state senator, these more local races that are in your state. There's not a lot of information. I know most people can't even name who their state representative is. So that's what's great about these voters' guides is they allow you to look all the way down to some of those more local races, and you can see the difference between the candidates. And again, they can't tell you who to vote for because these groups are nonprofit groups, and so they have to do it in a fair and a balanced way, asking everybody the same questions, printing their answers, providing the same type of information to everybody. And what it does is it empowers. I really believe that every pastor should be doing their job of equipping the saints. Ephesians 4:6, right?
Right.
And part of equipping the saints is equipping the saints to represent Jesus Christ in every area of life. One of those areas of life in this country is voting, that we need to represent Christ when we go in the voting booth. Well, you can't do that if you don't know who these people are or where they stand. And so I really think that all churches should be encouraging their people to get this information. They get good voters' guides with information so that they can then see where they stand, apply the Bible and their understanding of the Bible of how that should apply to this, and pick their candidates, being a good follower of Christ in who they vote and who they elect.
Just went to Focus on the Family here, and if you go to Focus on the Family and type in family policy groups, state family policy groups, there's about 36 of those, 36 if I counted right, that are actually providing you that kind of information. I might also, if I can mention that on Monday, we're going to provide some material that's provided by Richard Ford at Heritage Alliance, because there's a vote in Virginia on Tuesday, so we'll be providing some links on that. So we'll keep having those links up there when you have very important statewide races. But of course, we'll be watching the national ones and all the rest. And I think it's important to recognize that policy guide and those voters' guides give you a lot of information, not just how they voted in the past or how they answered a survey, but don't you have a section sometimes on which particular groups support them as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It tells you a lot. Some of the races that are really hard sometimes are like judicial races. So you might be voting in some states, you get to vote on your Supreme Court justices in your state. And I remember some elections where you're like, well, I don't really know much about these guys, but one of them was endorsed by Christian Coalition, Focus on the Family, the Heritage Foundation, the National Rifle Association. The other candidate was endorsed by the Gay and Lesbian Task Force,
ACLU, maybe
ACLU, et cetera. And you were like, you know what? I know a little bit about their philosophy and where they come from, and I think I know which one I would rather, pick to represent, the approach that I think they would take as a judge. So, those kind of questions are very helpful in giving people information so that they're then empowered to vote in accordance with their own beliefs.
Again, we've had in the past these pictures of the United States, and you click on your state, and we'll give you everything, Concerned Women for America, and Eagle Forum, and the Family Policy Group, and everything we can find so that you can do a lot of research before you go to the polls. But again, the family policy groups are really helpful because lots of times, because it's a national program, we focus more on national issues. But some of these family policies groups take you all the way down to the school board or dog catcher. It's just amazing.
And that's where you often really need it. You're we know who's running for our senator very often, but we don't know who's running for the city council.
And that's a very important issue, as we've talked about recently. Yeah. Okay, another question on that. So let's go to Michigan this time, WLJN. John, thank you for calling today.
Yes, thank you. I have been an activist in the political scene at the statewide level over the years. And as a Christian, I've come to make some radical decisions on how I am going to evaluate candidates. And I have decided that I am not going to vote for any more candidates who I can't establish as having a lifetime of moral integrity. And I want to distinguish that between moral integrity and ethical integrity. Mm-hmm. Because on the Democrat side of the aisle, as well as the Republican side, there are many candidates who have a sense of ethical integrity in that they will say what they expect to do when they become elected, and then they will fairly well perform that. There are a few of those. But the thing of it is, moral integrity, I think, requires that they have their priorities right morally, not just ethically saying, this is what I expect to do and then follow through with it. And because I am concerned about this, I start at the top. What's the most important issue to be considered? And that has to be life and death. I mean, what other issue is more important than that?
Sure.
And if candidate hasn't got their priorities right in regard to life and death issues, and I'm not talking about euthanasia. I'm talking about abortion primarily. Euthanasia might come later if we allow this to go on any further. But where candidates haven't got the moral integrity and courage to take a positive stand, a proactive stand during their campaign for life, without without this equivocation about the desires of the mother or the conveniences and whether it was rape or not and so on. If they haven't got enough moral clarity to do that, I'm not going to vote for them anymore because I think that we as Christians have to begin to operate on the basis of faith. And by that I mean we have to take the faith view of the long term and determine in our hearts and minds that this next election isn't the last one. This next election isn't the most important one. The one that's the most important is the one that gets someone elected who has moral character that pleases God and has their priorities right and has the moral courage to say, this is what I stand for when they're running for office, and this is what they end up doing. They do that when they get into office. Whether they stand alone on the floor of the House or the Senate or the state houses or wherever, they must have that kind of moral courage. And if we as Christians just refuse to vote in, to elect, or to pass a vote for people who don't have that moral courage, then we will raise the bar. As a Christian people, we will raise the bar and become, in a sense, a small minority out there like the blacks have been and other groups have been, who says this is a core which, if you want our vote, you'll have to meet our criteria to get a vote.
Well, again, we have to take a break, but a lot you've said, and I want to, when we come back from the break, give both of our roundtable guests a chance to respond. But again, this issue of moral integrity. And if you would like to join the conversation in the last half hour, 1-800-351-1212. One of the articles we're going to talk about is candidates that go wobbly on things like life and marriage. We'll talk about that and the issue of moral integrity right after this.
Some Christians think that legalizing so-called gay marriage is not a big deal, while Christians in Canada would disagree. Evangelical professionals have found themselves being denied work because they refuse to violate the Bible and support homosexuality. When school starts this September in Canada, a mandatory new sex education curriculum will be taught, telling children starting in the 3rd grade that gender is fluid and boys can decide to be girls or vice versa. As one believer wrote, Christians are increasingly being seen as public enemies. If the U.S. Supreme Court legitimizes gay marriage at the end of June, it will happen here. We need to pray. Please visit pointofview.net/pray. We need to be praying constantly. We'll send you occasional reminders along with a free booklet, Pray for America, and a wrist reminder. Make sure we can count on you. Take a moment today and join with us. Pointofview.net/pray. Pointofview.net/pray. Please go today. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford with us. It is our weekend edition. And for those of you that might just join us, we just had John on a minute ago from Michigan, made some very good points. I'll pick out a couple and then go around the round table and see what you might think. One, of course, if you're wrong on the issue of life, you're probably going to be wrong on a lot of other issues. So being pro-life isn't necessarily a qualification for office, but not being pro-life or being pro-choice, I think, can be a disqualification. But also this idea of wobbly, the article that we mentioned the other day with Jay Richards when he was on, Republican candidates who go wobbly on marriage deserve to lose. And John made a very good point, too, about if you have to be able to have the courage of your convictions to stand in the well of the United States Senate, even when everybody's attacking you. And Kelly, you've made that point before. Sometimes having a candidate who's been tested is better than a person that might be right on the issues, but you don't know how they're going to react later on.
Yeah, I've been involved in, I've been asked to endorse a lot of people through the years and all that. So I've when John talked about being an activist for years and what he's learned, it's exactly the lesson that I've learned, which is people can run for office and they not only can say they're for these issues, they can really mean it. They can really believe that they're for those issues. But but a lot of those people will disappoint you. And it's not because they lied to you, because actually if they were lying to you, you'd probably see through it. It's the people that rationalize and sort of lie to themselves that are the most deceptive, right? And so what I found is there's only one real way to find out, to know that they will not back down. And that is, what did they do before they ever ran for office? If they say they're pro-life, what did they do on that issue in their whole life until they ran for office? Now, if you wait until they ran for office, you'll find them all of a sudden donating and showing up at the pro-life events and et cetera. But if you really want to know if somebody's committed to it, then if it was something that was important to them, there should be some evidence of that. They should have been contributors to these issues or these groups. They should have been speaking out on those things beforehand. They should be involved, volunteering. That's what really tells you where people will stand. That's the only predictor that I have ever seen that is consistent and really does tell you. So watch these candidates, who are running for Republican, nomination side. They're all going to say right now all the conservative things for the most part. I know Jeb Bush is still not backing down on Common Core, but besides that and some immigration, they're going to all say they're pro-life. They're going to but you've got to look at what they did, and I'm not talking about what they did in office. That's not enough because you don't know what's going to happen when they come under real pressure, and there are some examples of that, of when some of these candidates already have come under pressure on religious freedom, for instance. When the Indiana situation happened and there was all the pressure on them to back off the religious freedom bill, what did the Republican candidates say? Did any of the candidates weigh in when the same-sex marriage case went to the Supreme Court? And I think it's very telling that people are running for office now. That case went to the Supreme Court. Some of the candidates spoke out. Yes. Some of the candidates, total silence. That tells you a lot. And so those are the things to look for, because if you don't have the moral courage to stand on your position, you can pretty much be assured that that person being pro-life or pro-whatever is going to mean nothing as soon as pressure comes.
I would even go to the point of saying if a person's been in elected office, and I wouldn't even consider anyone for president that's never been in elected office for the very reason that Kelly just mentioned. You need a track record. Ben Carson says a lot of great things, but when he got in trouble on the issue of whether homosexuals were born that way, he backtracked on his earlier statements because he saw the pressure. That one time, that one instance of him doing that, I thought, okay, there he goes. He's a doctor. He knows they're born that way. And he backtracked and tried to become all things to all people in that one case. So, I'm not willing to put my political capital into someone who has not been in office. The same thing with Carly Fiorina. She's a talented woman, but she's not willing to fight for marriage if we get the wrong court decision. So that's just one. I mean, I think there's a gauge right there. Somebody's got to have proved themselves out of office, as Kelly said, and in office. And for president, I mean, of all things, we're talking about the highest office pretty much in the world. And then, yes, you need to see, when candidates become political, you need to look out. Now, you mentioned an article that's posted at pointofview.net about going wobbly on marriage. And right there in the first page of the article, it talks about Marco Rubio. It says, there are already signs of trouble. Marco Rubio has at least one senior advisor telling him he'll scare millennials away if he opposes same-sex marriage. As a result, there's a big difference in how Rubio talks of marriage when speaking to CBN versus MSNBC. This author, was it Jay Richards that wrote this?
Yeah, he was on
He says
yesterday.
it's a mistake.
Yeah.
Rubio and other candidates who believe in marriage should defend it unambiguously and without compromise and ignore advisors who counsel otherwise. I think as we start to look at candidates, especially we who care about the social issues, we need to look for candidates who are really have backbone and are willing to stand up. I mean, we were talking about Rick Perry earlier. As governor, he did pretty much all he could to stand up against Obama and things that Obama was forcing on the state of Texas, like Obamacare, Medicaid, EPA regulations.
Common Core.
Common Core. Texas never bought into Common Core. So, that's one thing. I mean, another Texan, Ted Cruz, he was willing to take all kinds of darts and arrows for standing against or for repealing Obamacare and trying to get that into our budget. And, I just think that those are the types of characteristics we need to look for in a president in this climate right now, because the opposition is huge. Our religious liberty will not be protected unless we have a strong protector of that in the White House.
And I think there's something important in this too. There's two things that are necessary. First, you got to have a person who has courage. But that's not enough. That if you think because they had courage on that issue that they're going to have courage on this, you can't count on that. So, for instance, I think everybody knows that Ted Cruz has courage, and he has courage on pretty much all of his issues. But let's take Scott Walker. Scott Walker had courage against the unions. Okay, what he did is incredible, and people look at him that, and you automatically, I know a lot of people that are assuming, well, he's going to have courage on pro-life and on religious freedom and on, the first chance he got of that, as he was talked about as a candidate, was the Indiana Religious Freedoms Restoration Act. They came to him, and he took a dive on religious freedom. So just because somebody has courage doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to have courage on your issue, because that might not be the thing that really drives them internally. And you're going to find that out by finding out what they were committed to, what they did beforehand, before they ran for office, but also watching by where they put their political capital and where they don't.
Penna, let me come back to you just for a minute. We're taking some time because John had so many good things to say.
Yeah.
You talk about Marco Rubio having a senior advisor telling him, fill in the blank. That's another thing to evaluate, not only where they stand on the issues, but who they surround themselves with. There have been some questions about who Jeb Bush has surrounded himself with. You have already raised one with Marco Rubio. And personnel is policy, right, Kelly? We've talked about this before. We have to also kind of get a sense of who is in their campaign, because that's going to give them a little bit of a sense of who is going to be in their cabinet, right?
It does. I heard a lot of the candidates interviewed, and that was one of the big questions that was asked them. And some of them just gave such nebulous answers. I don't think they saw the value of communicating to, there was a conservative group, that, some of the real conservative stalwarts would be advising these people. It is very important. And I think, it may be early to ask them who their Health and Human Service Secretary would be. But I think you could begin to just look at who's in their campaign and what they stand for and what they're telling them.
And it's a very important point. And personnel is policy, because when you get to be president, guess what? You're not going to be sitting in every office. It's who you appoint that's really going to matter. So what kind of person do you surround yourself with? And quick example of opposites here is the comment by the head of the National Religious Broadcasters, Rich Bott, when the Jeb Bush campaign, or I think Jeb Bush himself, reached out to him, and his first question was, how could I consider supporting you when two of your very top people in the campaign are not only LGBT, but they've actually advocated against marriage being just a man and a woman. I mean, they've actually spent their energies and time against that, and he didn't really have a good answer. On the other side, I was talking to somebody about Ted Cruz's campaign, and his top people, all of them, are actually in a Bible study.
Yes.
So there's a real difference there. And so when you look at who people are surrounding themselves with, it tells you a lot about who they would appoint, the type of people they would surround themselves that would run things on a national level as well.
Well, again, we had Amy ask a question earlier about how to vote. Of course, John said some things as well. Got a little bit of an inside look here from some of these individuals and some very helpful principles to apply when you evaluate a candidate. We'll be back right after this.
Lawyer for the U.S. government had to answer a question he probably would have preferred not to tackle during oral arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court in Obergefell v. Hodges, the marriage case. Justice Samuel Alito asked the Obama administration's Solicitor General, Donald Verrilli, a question about how the religious liberty of religious schools that oppose same-sex marriage might be affected if the court rules that same-sex marriage is a civil right. Justice Alito brought up a case that came before the court in 1983, Bob Jones University versus United States. Here's the exchange. Justice Alito asked, in the Bob Jones case, the court held that a college was not entitled to tax-exempt status if it opposed interracial marriage or interracial dating. So would the same apply to a university or a college if it opposed same-sex marriage? Mr. Verrilli, the Solicitor General, replied, I don't think I can answer that question without knowing more specifics, but it's certainly going to be an issue. I don't deny that, Justice Alito. It is going to be an issue. For an organization's tax-exempt status to be revoked means it would no longer be exempt from federal income tax and is not eligible to receive tax-deductible contributions. Many, probably most schools would not survive that. General Verrilli's answer was, yes, religious schools that oppose same-sex marriage in their policies and teachings will have their tax-exempt status challenged and be likely to lose it if same-sex marriage becomes the law of the land. What about other organizations that hold to Orthodox Christian beliefs, like churches? Will churches be subject to loss of tax-exempt status if every state is forced to perform or even recognize same-sex marriages? Another justice, Justice Scalia, asked, and I'm quoting him from the oral arguments, he asked, is it conceivable that a minister who is authorized by the state to conduct marriage can decline to marry two men if this court holds that they have a constitutional right to marry? Then he said, I don't see how. Kelly Shackelford of Liberty Institute says, if we get a bad ruling later this month, religious liberty will come under severe attack. It's begun with wedding vendors. Other faith-based businesses will have hiring practices and rights to operate according to their religious beliefs challenged. Christian colleges and schools' accreditation will come under fire. Governments will attempt to force faith-based adoption and foster care providers to place children with homosexual couples. Licensing for many professions will depend upon acceptance of the gay agenda. And employees at every level of government and in the military, as well as federal contractors, will be penalized or punished if they do not toe the line that the right to same-sex marriage trumps religious liberty. When it comes to religious liberty, one of America's first founding principles, we're at a tipping point. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Only have a few minutes left, but let's see if we can pick off a few more here in California, KNLB. Daniel, thank you for calling today.
Hi, brothers and sisters. I just wanted to say a couple of comments. Kelly, you had mentioned, not too many of us know our state representative and Congress representatives anyhow, and I still don't, like you stated. And but it was humbling for me to actually make this call, and then also before this, talking to my pastor, talking to ministers, just asking them for advice in how to vote. Who's biblically sound, and what's the biblical questions that we need to ask in order to cast a good vote. And now I can, after listening to Point of View, I've picked up. We got the presidential legislative, and the judicial, three branches of government, just by listening to point of view. And I'd encourage every believer that's listening, we sit alongside people inside church, people we say hi to, people we see them on Wednesday Bible studies. This is what I do now, is I encourage people, hey, get out there and register. This is the time we need to do it. And you guys, all three of you have talked about this many times throughout the months, years. I've only cut you guys a little bit the last year and a half, so. But you could read the first 3 chapters of Genesis. Everybody can do that. God made Adam, and he created him in the image of God. And then he made Eve and brought them together. So right there's life. Choose life. Then it's marriage. Choose marriage. And then you could read the first 3 verses of chapter 12. That's where God called Abraham. And I'll bless those who bless thee, and I'll curse those who curse thee. Every one of us should be able to at least read that and share it with the rest of the believers that are around us. But, now's the time to encourage the rest of the people to register to vote and to cast a vote, a biblical vote, and that's it. Adam, Eve, and Abraham. That's life, that's marriage, that's life, and that's Israel, the nation Israel. So thanks, guys, for your time.
No, thanks, Daniel. That's I think that's important. I mean, it's a great practical application. Number one, are you registered to vote? Well, some people are going, I'm not sure if I'm registered to vote. Well, it's really easy, whether you're already registered or not. If you don't know, then all you have to do is go to the post office, go to probably your library, your local library, ask them if they have voter registration cards. I know they have them at the post office. And you can go to your registrar's office too, but you can even print them out on, at your house. You can go online, but fill out. It's so easy. You fill it out, you pop it in the mail, you're registered, and then you're ready to vote. Because 50% of the people are not registered to vote, and we're not talking about other people. Talking about even people who go to church every Sunday, and then of those who vote, most of them don't vote, even though they're registered. So first step is make sure you're registered to vote, and then secondly, there's all this information that's out there, and if we just had more pastors. Most pastors are not going to feel like they need to tell you who to vote for. Most of them aren't. But they could at least make sure that all the people in their church are getting good information so that they are then equipped to make their own decisions, trying to apply the Bible and trying to represent Christ when they go into that voting booth.
I was thinking about good information. Penna's commentary today is Alito's question, which we have on the website. And you said that you were with some people that did not even know about the possibility that we could lose our tax-exempt status. I feel like we talk about that all the time, but again, whether it's Penna's commentary, whether it's articles that are on the Point of View website, whether it's Liberty Institute, or many other people that have blogged about this, there are all sorts of reasons why we really just need to raise the level of education in the congregations right now.
Absolutely. I'm sure, Daniel's probably got a Sunday school class or a men's group or whatever, and we've got those emails. And when we see something that we think might be really, good for other people to see, it opens up a whole new world for people. I have people all the time that say, I just didn't know. I didn't realize. And so when you provide that information, you really empower people to act more biblically.
I liked how Daniel just had, a couple talking points that he gives when he talks to people.
Very good ones, yeah.
It's not like we have to have this brilliant treatise about all the political issues. We just have to have a couple of things to say. You could just kind of plan it. And then you can just bring it up with people. And, it's always kind of hard when you meet strangers or you're talking to someone you don't know that well, but you could just bring that up, like about, there's 19 Republicans in the race. What's your criteria for voting? And start a conversation that way. I think that is great. And if we're all just prepared in that small way to talk with someone, we can make a much bigger and outsized impact. We can multiply our influence. And as far as the pastors go, Kelly said, well, the pastor probably doesn't need to be telling people how to vote or who to vote for. But, pastors right now, I think it would be very important for them to give sermons on marriage. Mm-hmm. What is marriage? What does it mean biblically? Because why is it important that we keep it? and we protect it. Well, that is not a political issue. That's a spiritual, doctrinal issue. And so pastors should be preaching on that. And then anything about religious liberty should be coming out of the pulpit as well as everywhere else. There's, so many opportunities for pastors to weigh in without being quote unquote political.
Okay, for pastors, again, we have the link to the Religious Protections Guide. We have the link to the audit. And again, I recognize that some people might have heard this in the first hour, but people tune in and tune out. But let's talk one more time about if you're a church, if you're a nonprofit, or if you're a profit entity. What are some of the things that churches, Christian organizations, or businesses run on Christian principles need to do, and what is available at Liberty Institute?
The vast amount of Christian businesses and churches and Christian ministries, the overwhelming majority are not ready for what's about to occur and what's already occurring. Meaning, whether they get sued because they won't marry two men at their church or two women, or you name the issue. I think everybody knows it's coming. It's already started, and depending on what happens in the next 3 weeks, when the Supreme Court comes down with its decision, it's expected to intensify dramatically. And most people most ministries, most churches, and most for-profit Christian religious businesses are not ready. They don't have their legal documents in order. And so what we have online is, here are the documents you need to look at. Here is sample language that people have used. Essentially, the short circuit here is, in the past, people used to be very vague about their religious beliefs or background or whatever in their documents because they thought that was safer. And because of the Hosanna Tabor case a few years ago, it made very clear that you have a right to be a very distinct religious organization with your own set of beliefs, and the courts can't even really get involved in messing with those in any way. But if you have not written those down, if those are not in your policies, in those documents, you cannot use those as a defense. So if you haven't addressed these issues biblically and why that's important to you as a church, as an organization, then you're going to sit defenseless when these things come at you. So it's very important that they get this information, they update their documents so that they're ready for, not necessarily going to guarantee you they're going to win, but they're at least now are ready to defend themselves based upon what they believe and what they stand for.
So again, if you want to know about the audit, or if maybe you'd like to get some information about D-Day tomorrow, some great material there as well. Next week, we're going to talk about persecuted Christians, former Representative Frank Wolf, and we have a way now to support some of them, which we're going to do through Johnny Moore. We have Charles Murray with us, Paul Kanger talking about the attack on families. Dr. Merrill Matthews will be in studio as we talk about some of those issues. So it's going to be a great week, but have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, Shamila, and Abby for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. See you on Monday.
Monday, June 29th. That is likely the day the U.S. Supreme Court will release its ruling on whether the Constitution allegedly supports same-sex marriage. How much have you prayed asking God to intervene? The oral arguments made it clear if the court rules in favor of overturning thousands of years of history, it puts a set of crosshairs on every Christian school and ministry, every church, and every Christian, because if the Constitution allegedly supports it, every biblical Christian is forced to be an outlaw. Again, I ask, how much have you prayed? Now, I realize you can pray without joining our Pray for America campaign, but have you? Honestly now, have you prayed? We can all use reminders. Let us give you one from time to time. Take a minute or so right now and sign up at pointofview.net/pray. We'll send you a free Pray for America booklet and a wrist reminder pointing you to spend time in prayer for the nation. Pointofview.net/pray. Pointofview.net/pray. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank